I'm willing to bet that that little Rockstar intro just there, coupled with, the little jingle at the end, got at least some of you. I know it's not going to be everyone, but at least some of you feeling at least a little bit nostalgic. Like, for me personally, it brings back some memories when I was young and I experienced this game for the very first time in my life. Like, I can genuinely still remember how I felt back then when I first booted up this game, and I can remember how excited I was to play it. The game we're talking about here was, revolutionary for its time, and it's rightfully remembered by pretty much everyone to be one of the greatest in the series. And for a lot of people, that includes me, this game was our first introduction into this type of game and genre as a whole. It brought to the table a cliche and over-the-top story which was set in a world which was so atmospheric, mature, but also it didn't take itself that seriously. But enough with all that bullshit that you've heard from all these other YouTubers before. I'm here to talk about how great this game was because I've played it, you've played it, everyone has. I'm here to tell you how it felt to play Grand Theft Auto Vice City. To start off, I wanted to make this video because I really believe that Vice City, same as many other games from that time period, can be experienced more than once. And I'll try to elaborate on what I mean by that. So, in my case, when I first experienced Vice City, when I first played the game, I'd say I was probably 7 or 8 years old, maybe 9 years old, tops. And I can imagine that there's gonna be some of you right now thinking like, real shit, that's too young to be playing a mature rated game. With which I would completely agree. Like, to be honest with you, I'm all for that, but hear me out. So, back in the early 2000s, my family didn't really have a computer at home. Neither did we have a console of any kind, so I had no access to video games, so I had to resort to going to internet cafes. And that's the thing, the people running those internet cafes, they didn't really give a shit about the game ratings. To be honest with you, probably all the games on there were pirated to begin with, so all the game ratings were just completely disregarded. And couple that with the fact that people from my home country, they just basically saw video games as kind of clones of Super Mario, if that makes sense. Something trivial, something that couldn't possibly have a mature story or setting associated with it. And they didn't really see them as something serious and something to keep kids away from. And that's how I managed to play this game at such a young age. And to be honest, I personally can say that I've experienced this game in more than one way. First off, when I was this little dumbass kid playing it, and then, growing up, I played it again and I experienced it for my second time. So what I mean by that is when you're young and you're first playing the game, you have absolutely no fucking clue about what's going on. Zero comprehension of the story, like nothing, nada. But as far as you're concerned, you're basically just placed in this open-ass world for you to explore, and in general, you're kind of free to do anything you want. Especially, oh boy, especially if you know the cheats. But I'll get back to that later on in the video. So, coming back to the game a bit later in my life, when I was, not a little lobotomized running around, and now having supposedly two working brain cells together, I could actually understand the story, and I can tell you that I appreciate the game entirely differently nowadays. First off, you get ass blasted with all the nostalgia right off the bat, and you might find yourself developing a newly found appreciation for the game. At least it happened for me, especially now that I could actually understand what was going on in the story. And in this video, I'll try and discuss both of these aspects. And hey, if it does well, I might make it into a little series where I can cover games from my childhood and hopefully your childhood as well. So that way we can have a nice little homosexual moment together. So I guess sit back, get your asses comfortable, and let's begin. I really wanted to start off by describing my initial childhood experience. When I was a little kid, as mentioned before, I played Vice City for the very first time at an internet cafe. And back then I was incredibly lucky to have one such internet cafe be super close to where I lived. So every single day during the summer, when I was outside with my friends, we would stop by it and, play some games. And just to give you guys some perspective on how much it costs you to play games in an internet cafe back then, it would roughly cost you about the equivalent of 20 pence by today's standards to play, I'd say, 30 minutes in an internet cafe. And like reading the script out loud, it makes me sound like I'm getting a hooker or some shit, but that's besides the point. Also, I some of you might notice that 30 minutes isn't really enough time to do anything substantial in a video game, especially one which is story driven. So this would mean that we weren't able to, play the story or like let alone finish the game. And I would have to completely agree with you guys. Additionally, the computers back then were just that, standard run-of-the-mill PCs. So when your time was up, you just had to get up off the computer and let someone else play on it. Your alternative was to keep coughing up money to play more, but not a lot of people wanted to do that. In the case, however, that you had to get up off the computer, you'd occasionally get that one little bastard who'd save over your progress in the game, because the load and save game features in those internet cafes were basically a big ass free for all. The on average short playtime and the likelihood of my save game being erased by the time I got back to the internet cafe the next day, coupled with the fact that I had barely any comprehension of the English language as a whole, meant that playing the game for the story was pretty much impossible for me. This, however, was the least of my concerns, because I was there with my friends to have fun, and we would come up with so many ways to do just that. Starting off the game would skip all the initial cutscenes. This was because we just saw the game as this big fuck off sandbox where we could do all sorts of dumb things. For us, it was first and foremost a driving simulator, so that meant jacking a car and having fun. We would do all the dumb fucking stunts in the game and lose our shit every single time that the car landed in the water because, as pretty much every one of you knows, Tommy can't swim. So this was genuinely our biggest fear at the time. Water was in general a no-go zone. And looking back at it now, the game recycles the same like 6 NPCs and cars or whatever, and it's nothing stunning by any stretch of the imagination, but I realized that they had the memory limitations, they had the computing limitations. I get it, but back then, when you're 8 or 9 years old, your imagination can do wonders. You see the game the way the devs intended you to see it. And the world genuinely felt lived in and like nothing I had ever seen before. You're completely sold on the experience, and that's where the magic lies. Like seeing Tommy's janky ass front animation today, that shit's fucking haunting to look at. The guy has superhuman speed when he sprints, but back in the day I didn't give a two shit flying fuck about it. To me, it was just fine, and that's the appeal of it. Grand Theft Auto Vice City, as pretty much all of you know, has cheats programmed into the game. I know I don't really have to explain this, but for the one person who doesn't know what I mean, it boils down to this. While playing the game, if you type in a string from a list of cheats, that specific string grants you a bonus in-game. So these bonuses could range from weapons, to clearing your wanted level, to giving you health, and even to spawning a fucking tank. Initially we didn't know the cheats, so we just played like troglodytes, running people over in the game, and when we would inevitably get a wanted level, we'd kinda just see how long we could survive for. However, we weren't the only ones going to that internet cafe. You had older kids going there as well, and they knew all the good cheats. The nicer kids would tell you some of them, and little me ran like a motherfucker to get a pen and paper to write those cheats down. Back then, that was literally my most valuable fucking possession. It was like a bragging right. The amount of cheats you knew or had written down was directly proportional to your dick size. Or, at least it felt like it. Being able to type leave me alone and lose your 4-star wanted level was like the equivalent of busting the fattest nut. It felt awesome. As time went by and the initial excitement of the game's open sandbox passed, I decided to give the missions a shot. On average, it would take me a few attempts to pass each mission, but at the time I really didn't mind. Each time I started a new mission, it was accompanied by this feeling of excitement, as it was all new to me and it genuinely felt like I was watching a movie. Mind you, at first I had no fucking clue what was going on in the story. I was putting together my own little version of the story in my head based on what I was seeing in the cutscenes. And playing through the game, I ultimately got the general gist of the story, but all the small jokes, the innuendos, the genius writing, and the voice acting as a whole was completely unappreciated by me during my initial playthroughs as a kid. That's why I said earlier in this video that this game can, and quite frankly should be experienced more than once. The first time when you're a kid, you're just so amazed by everything. You remember and pay attention to all the little weird aspects of the game. From the animations of the NPCs to all the cars and all the little sounds. It all sticks with you. There is, however, one mission in the game that is complete ass. Just thinking about it gives me PTSD-like symptoms. The mission I'm talking about is the fucking little helicopter mission playing on the screen right now. The thing was so frustrating to deal with that when I was a little kid I remember the feeling of anticipation before each of Avery's missions. I was so afraid of when it would come up. The mission is so iconic, but so bullshit that I have a little story surrounding it. You see, I used to pride myself being a good GTA Vice City pilot. What I really mean by that is that I was just above absolute dog shit in terms of flying skill. My reputation had spread far and wide across the land amongst my primary school class. One day, as I was heading home with my friends, one of them wanted me to go over to their place and pass the mission for him. He was calling in the big guns. I felt the pressure on my shoulders, and I had to put my money where my mouth was and ace this mission. Which I did, of course, and it felt like slam dunking on him. You know, like full balls on face action because I could pass the mission and he couldn't. In all seriousness though, replaying this mission for this video, it's not hard, it's actually pretty easy. I know it's really shocking to hear this, but it's the truth. It only used to seem hard because, as I said at the time, we were little idiots playing this game and we had absolutely no spatial awareness skills, nor could we coordinate ourselves with the helicopter. And couple this with the fact that the helicopter can take damage from a number of sources, and also the amount of buttons you had to press to fly the fucking thing as opposed to, just running around or driving a car, you can pretty easily see how this can result in a clusterfuck of a situation, and it could also lead to rage quits. Finally, if you come back years later, you can actually appreciate the game for the story it had. Playing through all the missions when I had grown up, I managed to get way more involved in them. I still remember all the bits I hated as a kid, sure, but it was also nice remembering all the awesome things as well. Like for example, going to the beach in the first island right after I started the game and getting the buggy which is parked there. You see how the game as a whole perfectly encapsulates the 80s time period. You notice all the little notes to movies and shows such as Scarface and Miami Vice if you play it once you grow up. A part of the game that manages to convey this 1980s feeling very strongly is the radio. Like, holy shit, the music in this game is so good. There would be times when I'd be driving to a mission and a song would come on Flash FM for example, and I would just not want to get out of the car until the song is finished. The music is fantastic and I'll fight anyone that thinks otherwise. And it doesn't just stop there. Listening to all the fake ass commercials on the radio, I think they're genuinely funny and some of the best characters in the game in my opinion are the radio hosts themselves. Fernando Martinez and Tony are just two examples. The game as a whole has a fantastic cast of voice actors, and that fact alone makes the world feel so much more real. All in all, Grand Theft Auto Vice City is nothing short of a timeless classic. It came out at the perfect time in the early 2000s, and it managed to captivate the minds of a whole generation of kids. For a lot of people, it served as their first major introduction into computer games. It brought to the table an open world which was perfectly atmospheric and littered with little secrets to find everywhere. The city was divided into little parts, which are still remembered to this day by kids who grew up with the game. In addition, generally, Grand Theft Auto's radio stations never really disappoint, but I believe that this game was one of the first in the series to do the radio aspect of the game exceptionally well. Everything in this game, from the music to the voice acting, car sounds to the cheesy way NPCs talk, and the commercials on the radio, it's all masterfully crafted. And sure, I'll admit, the map is a bit small by today's standards, and the graphics aren't really groundbreaking by any stretch of the imagination, but in my opinion, the game still holds up. Playing it again after all these years, the nostalgia factor alone was well worth it for me, and getting to experience this game nowadays genuinely felt so refreshing. But it also felt as if I was still that little kid in the internet cafe, as I could still remember all the little details in the game. And if you haven't played the game in a while, I really suggest that you try and find some spare time in these quarantine times, and go on a little nostalgia field trip. You'll find yourself developing a newly found appreciation for the game. And because of all these factors, the game has its rightful place among so many other great games. And mind you, not just games from the Grand Theft Auto franchise, but amongst all the classics in general. I hope to see you guys in the next video, and I just wanted to say thank you for watching, and take care.